Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lena and I make college and book related content here on YouTube, and today is my October wrap up. So in the month of October, I read a total of 3 books plus 4 plays. It was mostly readings for my classes, but I did end up getting one pleasure read in, which is basically on par with what happened last month. I was looking back through my notes, and October turns out tends to be a not so hot month for me and reading because school is just like eating me alive at this point. But I'm hopeful that November will be a better month for reading at least. But before we get into the video, I just want to take this time to remind you that please go out and vote. The midterms are coming up this Tuesday, November 8th, I believe, and so make sure you're voting in your local election. Make sure you're registered to vote. Some states even allow same-day registration as the election, so if that's possible, make sure that you're getting registered and you're voting. Voting is so important. It's a way to make our voices heard, and it's a way in the United States to attempt to have accurate representation. We could get into that, but that's a whole other thing. So please make sure you get out and vote. It is super important, and I'm actually going to be voting this weekend, early voting and then dropping off my ballot, which I'm really excited for, and I encourage you all to do the same. But now we can get into the video. First book that I read in the month of October was Emma by Jane Austen. I have mentioned it a few times before in previous vlogs and wrap-ups, but I am taking a Jane Austen seminar, and so this is my senior English seminar, and we're reading most of her completed works. The one novel that we didn't read is Mansfield Park, and I'm honestly not sure why we skipped that one, but we did. Anyway, so we read Emma, and I would say the majority of my class was obsessed with this book, and I was definitely on a different side of things. I had a tough start getting into this book. To preface this, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I rounded up to 4 on Goodreads, but I gave it 3.5. I had a really tough start going into this book. The minute I opened it up, I was so frustrated with Emma as a character, but not in a way that like I could appreciate Emma for like me being frustrated with her, just in a way that like I was just sick of reading Jane Austen's work. So that was like not a great start to it, but I tried to not hold that against the novel as a whole, because I will say it was probably one of Austen's like more stronger books in the sense of the way it was written, the tone, the voice, kind of what's going on with free and direct speech and things like that. I think Emma's a really tricky character because she is so unlikable. She really ruins her friend Harriet's life, like truly destroys it. And she's not a good friend to her basically after that, and like some people argue that she like fixes things by the end, but I would argue that she doesn't, and that she's not actually a true friend ever to Harriet, and that she continues to be kind of self-serving. And furthermore, trying not to be too spoilery, but the ending is so disappointing, because if there's one thing that you can rally behind Emma for, is at least she's like independent thinking, and she's brash, and she's like, I don't need to get married, I'm rich and I'm educated, I don't need anyone. But the ending says something very different. So I just like struggled with that a little bit. I struggled with Mr. Knightley as a character. I found him extremely condescending and not really a great love interest, like kind of gross. But I was definitely in the minority for my feelings in this on the class, and also I know that I like had a tough time getting into this novel, so I ended up giving it 3.5 because I could tell that it was like well written, and more so than definitely Northanger and Sense and Sensibility. So kind of have mixed feelings on this one, and I'm glad that I got through it. I don't have to look at this again, and I am going to try my best not to write my final paper on this. Book that I read in the month of October was Persuasion by Jane Austen, and so this is her last novel, I believe, that she wrote, well, last complete novel that she wrote before she died. It's actually a very different novel in the sense of what's going on. Her characters, Anne Elliot, and then also the love interest, other characters around them are much older. Anne, I believe, is 26 or 27 years old, and she is considered a spinster. She rejected Captain Wentworth 7-8 years ago because they just like, she was advised that he was below her, and so there's a completely different tone to this novel. She is much older. She has resigned herself to spinsterhood. She's not really living the best life as a spinster, so it's kind of a less like glamorized version of that and more realistic, I would say. I also think that it's really interesting the way that the Navy is featured within this novel, because Austen's brothers were in the Navy and there were some issues with public perception of the Navy during this time, so many people have said that this was Austen's way of kind of supporting the Navy and like highlighting some great work that the Navy had done and continue to do. I gave this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. Once again, I rounded it up to 4, but for different reasons. Then I rounded Emma up for 4. Emma, I rounded up just simply because I could tell that it was a more well-written novel, and I was trying to give it the benefit of the doubt because I just knew that like I was in a bad mood when I was reading it, so that was not helping. But I liked this book because I just really liked Anne Elliot as a character. She was older, she was more mature. I thought that like she was witty, but like not like in a pick-me kind of way, because Lizzie Bennet like very much borders on that. And as like a 7th grader, when I read that, Lizzie Bennet, I was like, icon, queen, yes, go off. But when I read it again, I was like, she's kind of annoying. Like, I don't really like subscribe to that anymore. So I did think that was interesting to see the way that like Anne was still very much witty, but like in a different way. I also just think like the love story between Anne and Captain Wentworth is so sweet and heartwarming, and I think the discourse and like discussions on class is like actually very interesting in this novel, because I would say this is the first time that we're like truly going beyond like the upper echelons of society. Something that like I have realized with Austen's work is like she is very much like in like the upper classes, and writing from that perspective over and over again, and so this was a little bit refreshing. I mean, we weren't talking completely about like real true poverty and those people who are in the working class, but it was interesting. I also just think Captain Wentworth, like I liked him and appreciated him more as a hero than Mr. Knightley, than Edward, than other characters. Not more so than Mr. Darcy, but that's just because Darcy holds a special place in my heart. But yeah, so that's what I thought of Persuasion. Then for the book that I read for pleasure outside of class, I read The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey, or Roffey. This is a newer release. I'm a little perplexed about when it was released, just because the copyright page on this says 2022. But if you go like on Goodreads, there's older versions from 2021 and maybe even 2020. Sorry, there's a bug that I just like snatched out of the air. But yeah, so I read this book. I picked it up randomly off the browsing collection shelves because I was just trying to look for a new book. I've been in a reading slump ever since I finished A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. Like truly, I can't get into another book. And I've been trying to get into other books. Like I've started so many other ones. I started Cranford. I started Dream House. I started a couple other books that like I don't even remember their names. But I was trying to find a new book, and this one was so different than what I'd been looking at. And so I decided to pick it up, and I absolutely flew through it, and I really, really enjoyed it. The book takes place off the island of Black Conch in the mid-1970s. David, who's like pictured up here, is a fisherman in his 20s, and he comes across this mermaid named AAPI, like I'm not really sure to say her name, but he comes across her and he is stunned by her and her presence. And so eventually she is captured by these white American fishermen who come and they try to sell her off and make a profit off of her and really objectify her. And David ends up saving her life and like helping her escape from those fishermen. And then they slowly fall in love. So it's a love story, definitely. It does switch perspectives quite a bit. There's David's perspective from then, David's perspective from like present day, which is 2015, and then also Akaia's perspective, and then multiple other perspectives of other characters on the island. There's also like shifts in form, there's poetry, there's prose, there's journal entries. It's really, really interesting. And I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. I really appreciated the different POVs because the differences in voice was incredibly strong and well done. The writing was very lyrical. This is a book that kind of works through folktales and like myths and also just magical realism in general, so that was really interesting, and the writing really reflects that in its lyrical way. And then I also really appreciated the love story. I thought it was a pretty solid love story. And that's kind of why I wanted to read it at first, because I don't read a ton of like love story stuff. I mean, I say that after I've read like a million Austen, but like this is not Austen, clearly. But I also just found it interesting because there was a lot of important themes in this as well. So there was a lot of discussions about colonialism and racism, and sexuality, and like what it means to be a woman in like different times and different cultures and things like that. I think colonialism is probably one of the stronger themes in this. It's really interesting because it switches POVs. One of the characters, Mrs. Rain, Arcadia, she is one of the white people on the island, and her ancestors previously like owned most of the island and kind of built their wealth off of the enslaved people that were living on the island. And so slavery obviously was abolished and no longer exists in the 1970s on Black Conch. However, she, as the white woman and white person who descended from those ancestors, has really reaped the benefits of that, and she still owns a lot of the island. She's still incredibly wealthy because of that. And I think there's really interesting ways that this is discussed in the novel, because she's not demonized, she's not vilified, she is one of the points of view, so the reader does kind of get to know her and see her motivations and see who she cares about and how much love she has in her heart for her son and her lover and things like that. But that doesn't take away from like what her family did, and also like how she's benefiting off of colonial acts that enslaved so many people and really put a group of people at a disadvantage for generations to come. And so I think that's really powerful in this novel. And I also just think it's powerful because it's a love story that can deal with so many of these really great important themes. So I definitely really enjoyed this book. I didn't give it 5 out of 5 stars because I did struggle at points. I think this book could have been a little longer, maybe more well developed, and I think there were some, not necessarily plot holes, but things that felt like I didn't really understand why something was happening and like I needed more. But overall, I really enjoyed it and I thought it was a strong novel. And then I read 4 Shakespeare plays for my Shakespeare course. So I read Henry VI, part 1, 2, and 3, and then I read Richard III. So out of those plays, my favorite was probably Richard III, just because I think it was pretty strong in characterization, specifically Richard III, but also I think in some of the other characters. Women that were portrayed in parts 1, 2, and 3 of Henry VI, like those portrayals were pretty terrible. Joan of Arc specifically in part 1, like that was so offensive. And then the representation of like Queen Margaret, not great. She got slightly better, I think, in Richard III. However, there was just like a lot of issues with that. I also just thought that Henry VI, like kind of just by the third part just descended into complete violence, and like it was just about violence at that point. Like the characters weren't really developing anymore, and it just felt like, let's just watch a lot of decapitations on stage. So yeah, that was that, and I enjoyed Richard III slightly more because I think there was better character development and also just more dialogue that like served a narrative purpose. But yeah, I'm also done with reading all of the history plays for that Shakespeare course, which feels really good that I have that behind me. And now in the next month, we're going to be working on a production of, I think we're doing part 1 of Henry IV, and we've all been assigned different roles and we'll be memorizing and doing things like that. So no more new reading for Shakespeare on that front, and that's why I'm hopeful that I will be able to do more reading for myself. I say that as like I'm facing 3 large research papers that are all going to be written this month. And by large, I mean like 20 plus pages. So like Will I be able to do that? I don't know, but I can be optimistic. You know, we have the week of Thanksgiving. Maybe I can get some reading done there. But yes, so thank you so much for watching today's video. If you have any questions or book recommendations, video recommendations, leave them down in the comments below, and I will see you all next week.